In the year 28 CE, a boy waited in the slave markets of Ephesus. He was 11 years old. His fate was about to end in a way he could not foresee. An imperial agent passed through the rows of children. When he paused in front of this boy, the price was arranged: 6,000 denarii, 12 times what a typical slave would cost. The boy was placed onto a ship. His destination was an island he would never leave. What occurred there would stay hidden for centuries. Capri rises from the Tyrrhenian Sea like a natural stronghold. 4 miles long, barely a mile across, the island shows sheer limestone cliffs on nearly all sides. Only one safe landing exists: Marina Grande, a small harbor on the northern coast. Every other approach ends in rocks or vertical walls falling straight into deep water. Tiberius used this geography deliberately. Across the island, he erected 12 separate villas. Each held a strategic position: cliff edges, hilltops, coastal promontories. Guards could spot approaching vessels miles before they arrived. Signal fires could communicate between compounds instantly. Anyone trying to reach the emperor without permission would be noticed long before landing. Villa Jovis ruled them all. Built on the eastern tip of the island, it stood 1,200 feet above sea level. The complex covered nearly 23,000 square feet, spreading across multiple terraces carved into the mountainside. On 3 sides, the ground simply ended. No walls were needed, where a sheer drop offered better security than any fortification. The villa's design exposed its true purpose. Water systems, massive and elaborate, ensured the estate could survive indefinitely without mainland supplies. Separate residential wings isolated different groups: family quarters, guest chambers, staff housing, and private rooms accessible only through guarded passages. The emperor could move through his palace without ever being seen by anyone he did not wish to meet. Entry to Villa Jovis required navigating a single steep path. Guards checked every visitor against approved lists. Sejanus controlled those lists. No senator, not magistrate, not even family members could speak to Tiberius without explicit permission granted in advance. The emperor had reshaped himself into something unreachable, a god hidden behind a stone in distance. The crossing from the mainland strengthened this isolation. 3 miles of open water separated Capri from Sorrento. The currents ran unpredictably. Storms could trap vessels for days. Even in calm weather, small boats struggled against the winds funneling through the bay. For anyone brought to the island against their will, the sea became an impossible barrier. Swimming meant ending your own life. No boat left without imperial authorization. The guards ensured compliance. Hundreds of workers maintained the estate: cooks, cleaners, gardeners, builders, and personal attendants. They lived in dedicated quarters built into the lower terraces of the villa complex. Their movements were restricted, their interactions monitored. Information could not escape if no one ever left to carry it. Within Villa Jovis itself, certain rooms remained mysteries even to most household staff. Hidden chambers accessible through concealed doors, private bathhouses with separate entrances, wings that visitors never saw, where silence was enforced. Absolutely. The villa's layout created zones of increasing secrecy, each layer protected by guards who reported directly to Sejanus or the emperor himself. This was not a retreat. It was a machine designed to enable secrecy. Every architectural choice, every guard post, every controlled pathway served one purpose: to create a space where Tiberius could do anything he wished, without witnesses, without judgment, without consequence. The Roman slave markets operated with brutal efficiency. In cities across the empire, Delos, Ephesus, Alexandria, Rome itself, human beings were displayed like livestock. Children stood in rows, their bodies examined by buyers who checked teeth, skin, and build with clinical detachment. Scribes recorded every detail in inventory lists: age, origin, physical characteristics, special qualities. The imperial household had specific requirements. Agents working for Tiberius searched for boys between the ages of 10 and 15. They favored certain physical traits that Roman aristocratic culture prized: lighter complexion, delicate features, hairless bodies, graceful movements. These qualities were described in procurement records with disturbing precision. One inventory from the period lists a boy as having gratia corpus, grace of body. His sale price was 4 times the standard rate. Geography mattered.
slaves from the Greek East, Syria, and parts of Asia Minor commanded higher prices in these specific categories.
Roman purchasers believed these regions yielded more refined appearances. Gaul and Germania provided different kinds of workers valued for different purposes. For Tiberius's needs, eastern provinces dominated the supply. The economics were staggering. A typical agricultural slave might cost 500 denarii. A skilled craftsman could fetch 2,000, but boys matching the imperial criteria sold for 6,000 denarii or more. For slave dealers, supplying the imperial household meant enormous profit. They actively searched for inventory that met these specifications, sometimes traveling to provincial markets specifically to acquire suitable children. Not all came through purchase. Provincial governors seeking imperial favor sometimes sent gifts to Capri. These children of freedmen or provincials were presented as tokens of loyalty, young attendants for the emperor's household. Once delivered, their former status became irrelevant. On Capri, no legal protection survived the journey. Freeborn or enslaved, the distinction vanished inside those villa walls. Conquest provided another source. When legions subdued a province, the aftermath always included taking captives. Officers selected prisoners based on age and appearance, setting aside certain children for specialized markets rather than selling them in bulk. These selections were not random. The officers knew what types brought premium prices and where to sell them. Transport from eastern markets to Italy took weeks. The Classis Messinensis, Rome's naval fleet based at Vecenum near Naples, occasionally provided discreet vessels for imperial purposes. Children traveled aboard well-appointed ships, their journey concealed beneath bureaucratic language. Manifest documents listed them as household attendants or musicians for the imperial court. The terminology served its purpose, obscuring their actual destination and fate. Imperial agents supervised the process with meticulous care. Before departure, selected children underwent initial preparation.
They learned basic Latin if they spoke only Greek or Aramaic. They received instruction in proper behavior when addressing superiors. They were taught to move silently and respond instantly to commands. This preliminary training began before they ever saw Capri. The numbers are difficult to establish with certainty. A villa complex the size of Jovis required hundreds of workers for basic operations. Among these, sources suggest Tiberius maintained a smaller specialized group for his personal service. Suetonius indicates dozens rather than hundreds. Over the 11 years Tiberius spent on Capri, the total likely reached into the scores, perhaps more. Each boy had a life before the markets, a family in Antioch, a village in Galatia, a farm outside Ephesus. Those lives ended the moment they were sold. Their names were replaced with Roman designations or simple descriptive labels. Their origins ceased to matter except as markers of value in a transaction. The procurement system reveals something essential. This was not impulsive cruelty. It was organized, systematic, economic. A supply chain existed to fill this demand. Dealers specialized in it. Agents knew what to look for and where to find it. Money flowed through the system in predictable patterns. Ships carried children across the Mediterranean on regular schedules. The empire's bureaucratic machinery, the same system that built aqueducts and maintained roads, devoted resources to acquiring children for the emperor's villa. The operation had structure, logistics, record-keeping. What happened on Capri was not the aberration of one disturbed mind. It was enabled by an entire apparatus that functioned smoothly, efficiently, and without moral hesitation. The boat reached Marina Grande at dawn. Guards pulled the children onto the dock, checking manifests against expected arrivals. From the harbor, a steep path climbed towards Villa Jovis. The boys walked in single file, surrounded by attendants who spoke little and explained nothing. The ascent took hours. By the time they reached the villa's outer gates, the mainland had disappeared behind them. Inside the complex, they were separated immediately. Any children who had traveled together were divided, placed in different sections of the household quarters. This separation was deliberate.
Friendships implied loyalty to someone other than the emperor. Isolation stopped bonds from forming, kept each boy reliant solely on those who controlled his survival. The quarters assigned for their housing occupied a lower terrace of Villa Jovis, stone rooms 12 feet square with narrow windows facing the sea. Each space held 4 to 6 boys. Sleeping pallets lined the walls. A single oil lamp provided light after sunset. The doors locked from the outside. Training began within days of arrival. Older attendants, men who had served the household for years, conducted the initial instruction. They taught in Greek and Latin both, ensuring every boy understood regardless of his origin. The curriculum covered practical skills first: how to move quietly through corridors, how to stand motionless for hours, how to anticipate needs without being asked. Performance arts came next. Boys learned to sing under instruction from a household musician. They practiced movements that mirrored dancers, developing grace and fluidity. They memorized verses from Greek poetry, learned to recite them with proper emphasis. These skills were presented as entertainment training, preparation for serving at imperial banquets and gatherings, but other lessons revealed darker purposes. The boys learned to read facial expressions, to sense shifts in mood from the smallest gesture. They studied the emperor's preferences, his patterns, his anger triggers. This knowledge was survival instruction. Understanding when Tiberius was pleased or displeased could mean a difference between favor and punishment. Obedience training was absolute. Questions were forbidden. Hesitation brought immediate correction. The boys learned to answer commands instantly without thought or resistance. Older attendants demonstrated the consequences of failure. Scars on their backs, missing fingers, the haunted expressions of those who had endured years in this household. Grooming consumed hours each day.
Bodies were oiled until skin shone. Hair was trimmed and arranged according to the specific styles. Nails were cleaned and filed. The boys were taught to move in ways that highlighted their youth, to stand in poses that displayed their forms to advantage. This presentation was not vanity, it was requirement. Daily routines followed strict schedules. Waking at dawn, washing in cold water from the cisterns, exercises to maintain flexibility and appearance. Midday brought training sessions. Afternoons involved rehearsals of whatever performances were planned. Evenings meant preparation for potential summons to the emperor's private quarters. A ranking stood among the boys. Those who satisfied Tiberius earned small privileges: better meals, thicker blankets, freedom from certain duties. This system bred rivalry, blocked solidarity. Each boy learned that his survival relied on pleasing the emperor's wishes better than the others. The training phase varied. Some boys were judged ready within weeks. Others needed months before they were considered sufficiently prepared. Readiness was decided by the senior attendants who reported to Sejanus's trusted lieutenants. No boy knew when his training would end and his real service would begin. The instant of first presentation to Tiberius came without warning. A guard would arrive, choose a boy, and guide him through corridors to private chambers most household workers never entered. What occurred during these first encounters was not discussed. The boys who returned said nothing. Whether from fear, shame, or firm prohibition, silence was absolute. This was the system. Not random cruelty, but organized exploitation, refined through repetition, enforced through terror. By the time a boy stood before the emperor, his will had been carefully broken, his identity erased, his purpose reduced to a single function. Suetonius, writing 80 years after Tiberius's death, noted allegations that still disturb. He claimed the emperor encircled himself with young boys he called pisculi, little fishes.
The phrase itself held significance in Roman society. It pointed to those who performed intimate acts in bathhouses and private rooms, a coded phrase known by anyone familiar with Roman aristocratic practices. According to Suetonius, these boys were taught to perform as Tiberius bathed. The emperor's secluded bathhouse at Via Jovis displayed marble pools supplied by the intricate system.
Here, from all witnesses, the boys would swim between his thighs. Their actions outlined language that left no doubt about their purpose. Suetonius claims that unusual and degrading behaviors took place while Tiberius relaxed in the baths. The account then shifts to allegations so extreme that later writers avoid describing them directly. He accuses the emperor of developing deeply corrupt practices during his time on Capri, shaped by isolation, unchecked authority, and the absence of restraint. These stories are presented as Suetonius's explanation for the dark reputation that followed Tiberius into history. Boys were presented during feasts, dressed in scant clothing, or sometimes nothing at all. They poured wine,
lay beside guests, and staged dances between courses. The entertainment was designed to erase boundaries, to normalize conduct that would have been shocking in Rome. Mythological reenactments provided further cover for exploitation. The boys would portray figures from Greek legends, Ganymede and Zeus, Hyacinth and Apollo, other stories where gods took young male lovers. These performances allowed Tiberius to frame his desires in cultural terms, to present exploitation as artistic expression. Roman aristocratic culture had long romanticized Greek practices, and the emperor weaponized this acceptance. Guests who visited Capri, always carefully selected by Sejanus, witnessed these displays. Their complicity was guaranteed through participation. Once they had attended such entertainments, they became implicated. Any senator who later criticized the emperor could be reminded of his presence at these events, his silence interpreted as approval. The frequency of these activities is difficult to establish. Suetonius suggests they were regular, perhaps even nightly. Tacitus implies they occurred throughout Tiberius's residence on Capri, but does not specify patterns. What both sources agree on is that these were not isolated incidents. This was sustained behavior over years.
Boys who failed to please faced immediate consequences. Those who resisted, who showed reluctance or disgust, were removed from service. Their fates varied, but few outcomes were merciful. Some were reassigned to brutal labor, maintaining the villa grounds. Others vanished entirely, their absence explained away if anyone dared to ask. The emperor's preferences shifted over time. Suetonius suggests that as Tiberius aged, his demands became extreme. What had begun as exploitation of adolescents expanded to include younger children, then infants. Whether this progression was accurate or represented exaggeration remains debated, but the core allegation that Tiberius used boys for his gratification appears in multiple sources. The question of source reliability deserves consideration. Suetonius wrote during the reign of Hadrian, decades after Tiberius's death. He never witnessed these events personally. His sources included lost memoirs, court gossip, and oral traditions passed down through aristocratic families. Some historians argue he embellished to satisfy readers hungry for scandal.
Yet Tacitus, writing earlier and with greater care, independently confirms the substance of the accusations. He may have avoided graphic details out of restraint rather than disbelief. Other contemporary references, though fragmentary, suggest that Romans of the period believed these stories. The Senate never investigated after Tiberius's death, but absence of inquiry does not mean absence of truth. It may simply reflect that everyone involved wanted the matter buried. The cultural context complicates modern understanding. Roman aristocratic culture accepted certain forms of exploitation that would be criminal by any modern standard. Individuals held as property, particularly boys, existed in a legal category that denied them bodily autonomy. What happened on Capri was not unique because it occurred, but because of its scale and the emperor's direct involvement. Other Roman elites maintained similar arrangements. Wealthy households kept young workers specifically for intimate purposes. The practice was known, quietly accepted among the aristocracy, and rarely discussed publicly. Tiberius's behavior was perhaps more extreme, more systematic, more isolated from social constraints, but it existed along a spectrum of exploitation that Roman law permitted and Roman culture normalized. The boys themselves left no records. Their voices are absent from the historical accounts. We know them only through the descriptions of their abusers and the historians who documented those abuses. Their individual experiences, their suffering, their resistance or resignation, all of it vanished into the silence that Capri enforced. Lucius Aelius Sejanus understood power better than any man of his generation. As prefect of the Praetorian Guard, he commanded the only armed force stationed in Rome itself. When Tiberius withdrew to Capri in 26 CE, Sejanus became the empire's effective ruler. Every message to the emperor passed through his hands. Every visitor to the island required his approval. This control was absolute.
Senators who wanted to communicate with Tiberius wrote letters to Sejanus first, requesting permission to send correspondence. Provincial governors seeking guidance on policy submitted their questions to the prefect, who decided which deserved imperial attention. Even family members found themselves subject to Sejanus's gatekeeping.
The emperor's isolation was physical, but Sejanus made it bureaucratic as well. The prefect used this position mercilessly. Tacitus records how Sejanus intercepted messages that might have informed Tiberius of problems in Rome. Reports of unrest never reached Capri. Complaints about Praetorian misconduct were buried. Warnings about Sejanus's own growing power were suppressed. The emperor heard only what his prefect wanted him to hear. In return, Sejanus protected Tiberius's secrets. Any rumor about activities on Capri could be traced to its source. Those who whispered faced treason charges.